as the crackdown on students and academics in the United States continues. We hear warnings from a former member of Congress.
Donald Trump is sending a message to the world. If you don't think like me, if you don't love Israel, if you don't love America, we don't want you here.
But Trump's allies deny that the administration is targeting dissenters.
In the United States, we value, particularly for our citizens, freedom of speech higher than any other country in the world does.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. On his first day back in the White House in January, President Donald Trump issued an executive order promising to restore free speech and end censorship. But he since unleashed federal agencies against those who denounce Israel's war on Gaza. 9 days into his administration, President Trump signed another executive order to, quote, prosecute, remove, or otherwise hold to account the perpetrators of unlawful anti-Semitic harassment and violence. Since then, the US has arrested and detained international students and academics. Among them, Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University graduate student and lawful permanent US resident. He was arrested in New York in March and is being detained in Louisiana. So is Rumeisa Ozturk, a PhD student at Tufts University, who was arrested after co-writing an article calling on Tufts to divest from companies with links to Israel. Neither of them has been charged with a crime, and no evidence has been presented against them to back up claims of anti-Semitism, according to court filings and government memos. The Trump administration has argued that they could both be deported under the Immigration and Nationality Act, which Secretary of State Marco Rubio has invoked against dozens of international students accused of having, quote, adverse impacts on the country's foreign policy. So, is the Trump administration moving away from its stated commitment to freedom of speech under the guise of protecting national security?
This is not a matter of simply violating university rules. This is an anti-war movement.
And if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, we would deny your visa.
The Secretary of State has the right to revoke a green card or a visa for individuals.
Joining us now is Ken Cuccinelli, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security during Trump's first term in office. Mr. Cuccinelli, in March this year, agents from the Department of Homeland Security arrested Mahmoud Khalil, a graduate of Columbia University, a lawful permanent resident of the United States. Was this a clear overreach, an abuse of power?
No, it wasn't, and the courts have thus far found as such, although I expect litigation will continue to proceed. There are numerous different authorities that the administration has available to them when dealing with non-citizens, whether they have a green card, as we would say, for a legal permanent resident, or they are here on a student visa, or they're here illegally. So the national security process was used, implemented by the Secretary of State in that case, and the courts have thus far held that that was appropriate, and I fully expect that to be sustained.
You are violating the First Amendment rights of anyone who lives in the United States to freedom of expression, aren't you?
So that's a sweeping statement. Assuming we're talking about Khalil, there's no question that any situation like this will implicate what people can say and when, and obviously in the United States, we value, particularly for our citizens, freedom of speech higher than any other country in the world does. And so I acknowledge that that appears in conflict here. However, when you're supporting an identified terrorist organization, we have pretty strict limitations on what one can do in terms of supporting those organizations.
Well,
Hamas,
hold on, Mr. Cuccinelli.
no,
What is
no,
the
no,
evidence?
no, let me finish.
Hold on.
Hamas
What is the
an
evidence
identified
that he
terrorist
was supporting
organization,
a terrorist
and
organization?
that was the touchstone for the removal of Khalil.
What was the evidence that he was supporting a terrorist organization?
So I don't have the case dossier in front of me, but we do know that he was organizing the protests at Columbia, for example, including sit-ins and trespassing and violating dispersal orders. So helped organize violations of the law by others, not just himself, in support of Hamas.
But I do have to correct you here. He never, he never supported Hamas. He was in fact one of the lead negotiators on campus at Columbia with the university leadership. He has participated in peaceful protests, and as you know, as a constitutional lawyer, you know that the right of every person within the United States to free speech is a cornerstone of American democracy. Why wasn't he afforded that basic right?
So it is a cornerstone of American democracy, but non-citizens do not have the same First Amendment rights as U.S. citizens, and as this case exemplifies. And part of the value of being
you're
a
saying
citizen
this because
is that
as
you
a
get the
constitutional
full panoply
lawyer,
of those rights.
As a constitutional lawyer, you are fully aware that every person within the United States has a constitutional right to freedom of expression. This is clearly stated in the First Amendment. Everyone.
That right is not the same for everyone. Yes, it exists, but the fact of the matter is that if you are not a U.S. citizen, you do not have, for example, if a U.S. citizen did the very same things Khalil did, there would be no basis to remove them from the country.
What
But
did
there
he
is a
do?
legal
What did he
basis
do
to
as far
remove
as you
Khalil.
understand it? How did he break the
Excuse me?
law? What did he do in violation of any U.S. laws? Let's be honest, was he simply arrested and detained because of his political beliefs?
I can't speak to what the administration's own decisions were. I'm not part of the administration, but clearly his support for Hamas and the threats to Jewish students and the intimidation exercised at Columbia was something that was the key factor for him. And let's face it, Donald Trump campaigned on this.
You say Donald Trump campaigned on this. In fact, Donald Trump on his first day in office said that he would respect or reinstate respect for freedom of speech in America. The DHS stated that Khalil's arrest was made, quote, in support of President Trump's executive orders prohibiting anti-Semitism, and that Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas. Yes. Again, where is the evidence?
Yes, he helped organize intimidation of Jewish students at Columbia University. And the Secretary of State so found, and he was removed for it. He fell afoul of the law and of his rights, such as they are as a legal permanent resident. Those rights are not the same as a U.S. citizen in respect to freedom of speech, particularly once you start advocating and advancing and behaving, for instance, protesting and trespassing in support of Hamas.
Again,
more earlier
correction
of me is I don't accept it. I reject it. This is a Hamas supporter in the United States.
There is no evidence that he is, and if there were, you'd imagine the government would have shown that evidence, would have charged him with a crime. There's the case of the PhD student in Boston, Rubeisa Ozturk, and so many others who were literally abducted without warrant from the streets of America by undercover agents, thrown into unmarked vehicles. Does this look like a lawful arrest to you?
Well, it certainly is a lawful arrest based on the authority that they were using. So yes, and you have started your comment by treating the First Amendment once again, as you've done multiple times now, as the same for everyone under all circumstances. And the First Amendment doesn't apply the same to U.S. citizens under all circumstances, and it certainly doesn't apply to non-citizens the same as it does to U.S. citizens.
If the same individuals in question who've been arrested and detained had been protesting Russia's occupation of Ukraine, its war in Ukraine, would they have been given the same treatment, yes or no?
Yeah. Well, in the case of Khalil, if they were organizing, trespassing, intimidation of other students, then I would expect that the same treatment could be dealt out. Yes,
He
but
was on his
there are
university
accompanying
campus.
actions that went along with Khalil's views.
Clearly, there's a pattern here, Mr. Cuccinelli. A memo from Homeland Security officials claimed that another graduate student, Romesa Osterk, engaged in, quote, anti-Israel activism. So students from certain minority groups are being targeted and detained simply for speaking up against Israel's war on Gaza. Isn't that clearly what is going on here?
So you're turning it into a racial issue. I don't think it would matter if that person was Norwegian. The result would be the same. So
If they spoke up for Palestine,
let's take the
correct?
race and ethnicity out of this. I do think you have identified in the Ostrich case the most questionable from a speech versus security standpoint for a non-citizen situation that the Trump administration is dealing with.
You said this in 2011 in comments published in The Atlantic, quote, the First Amendment protects the rights of speakers we agree with, but also, and more importantly, it protects those speakers we would condemn. Does that include Khalil and others who think like he does?
That's a universal statement about universal principles. And so, yes, it applies in all cases for everyone. But that does not mean the same balancing act that I described earlier as a matter of law isn't appropriate to take place here. And the Trump administration is well within its rights to remove Khalil from the country and to deny him further process in terms of becoming a citizen. For your viewers, the legal permanent resident status is the only step before naturalization as a U.S. citizen. So he has now been denied that opportunity in the United States.
But it is both illegal and unconstitutional, isn't it? ACLU,
No.
the American Civil Liberties Union, said this on his arrest. This arrest is, quote, unprecedented, illegal, and un-American. The First Amendment protects everyone in the United States. The government's actions are obviously intended to intimidate and chill speech on one side of a public debate.
There is enough law in the United States for basic protections for these individuals. And in Khalil's case in particular, he egregiously violated those standards and he's been removed from the country appropriately.
The truth is you have been violating those standards. You and the Trump administration and others who think like you, that freedom of expression can only apply selectively to some and not others. That's the truth, isn't it?
No, that's not the truth. And it's interesting how you phrase that to kind of reveal your own radical biases. The fact of the matter is the First Amendment gives very broad protection. But in the case of somebody like Khalil, who's organizing anti-Semitic threats and intimidation, which has been documented by Jewish students at Columbia.
What is anti-Semitic about calling for an end to a genocide, an end to a military occupation, an end to the killing of children? What is wrong with that?
Well, of course, literally, as you phrase it, there's nothing wrong with it, but that's not happening. That's not what Israel is doing.
Why are people who are calling for
Israel
an end
was
to all of
attacked
this being detained?
They had a terrorist attack that by proportions was far worse than 9/11, with the rape and murder of women and children in cold blood, people calling home and bragging about it to families back in the Gaza Strip that were just terribly proud of their sons
let's not distort the issue.
Kinds of murders. And these
If there
were
is
committed by
nothing
people
wrong with peaceful protests calling for an end to a war,
wipe these Jews
why
off
are
the
you
earth.
punishing people who are calling
So you're
for an
defending
end?
the people who are committing genocide. You are defending genocide.
I am defending the right of people, as the US Constitution does, to call for an end to a war that has gone on for well over a year and a half, with US support and US weapons. What ultimate message is the US sending to the rest of the world by detaining individuals for their political activism, for their beliefs?
The Trump administration is sending the message, not so much to the rest of the world as to the United States, particularly universities, that we will protect the civil rights of Jewish students and everyone else on our campuses, period.
How are you protecting the rights of everyone else?
Well, they would do the same thing. The point of everyone else is the same thing would apply if any other group, including, by the way, Muslim students were being threatened and intimidated at universities.
But you are vilifying
That is
everyone
not,
else,
but
Mr.
that's not what's
Cuccinelli.
happened the
And
last
we
year and a
saw
half
it
at
is what's
American
happening.
universities.
All the other students who have been calling for an end to Israel's war have been vilified, and you have conflated their support for Palestinians in Gaza with support for Hamas. Two very different things.
Actually, you're absolving them of their support for Hamas. Those can be two different things, but there are plenty of people like Khalil who may have supported the one legitimate item you referenced, but not the illegitimate one. And when I say illegitimate, I mean the support of a terror group like Hamas and its goals from the river to the sea, which of course is just code words for wiping out Jews. And eliminating Israel as a nation on the face of the earth.
Again, this is disingenuous, but let me ask you, do you support every person's right to live in peace? Do you support Palestinians' right to live in peace and security?
I would like to see every person on the planet live in peace and security, yes.
Including Palestinians?
Everyone, every single person.
Ken Cuccinelli, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Thanks very much.
Good to be with you.
Now, since President Trump took office, there have been at least 139,000 deportations, that's according to the White House. While the overwhelming majority of those deported are illegal immigrants, many of the student activists being detained also face deportation. The Secretary of State has confirmed that hundreds have had their visas revoked over alleged anti-Israel activism. Joe Walsh is a former Republican congressman and presidential candidate who has been critical of the administration's policies. He joins us now. Congressman Joe Walsh, you've described the arrest and detention of Mahmoud Khalil as wrong. What is the most troubling aspect of it for you?
That we detained this guy in the middle of the night. We apprehended him. We took him away from his wife and his baby. We've been holding him for almost 2 months now, and the Trump administration wants to deport him. All of this because of what he's said and what he believes. That is utterly un-American and unconstitutional. That's not what America should be.
But what do you make of the justifications that have been used by the US administration that people like Mahmoud Khalil hold beliefs that are against US foreign policy, against US national security?
Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who's been leading the charge on this, they originally said he committed crimes. He didn't commit any crimes. We've detained a number of these people. We've tried to revoke almost 1,800 student visas, foreign students here in America, not because of any crimes they committed, but again, because of their speech and their thoughts. Look, I'm very pro-Israel. I'm off the charts pro-Israel, but you have a right in America to speak out against Israel. You have a right as an American citizen to do that. You have a right as someone here on a green card or a student visa.
But apparently not anymore. Apparently not anymore, because those who've been arrested and detained, like Rumeisa Ozturk and Mahmoud Khalil, have been accused of anti-Israel activism, anti-Semitic campaigns. Did you see any evidence to suggest that?
We've seen no evidence of that. And look, I'm sure that he and I disagree on Israel and Gaza. Fine. Here's though what I'm encouraged by. The courts in general are holding back against Trump. So now we're going to have a trial. He'll have a hearing on the substance of Trump and Rubio trying to deport him. And I don't think they have a case. I hope the courts make that ruling. He shouldn't be deported because of what he said or how he thinks.
Are you concerned at all, though, that the administration's expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism to include any criticism of Israel could lead to the policing of thought in the United States for anyone who does not support Israel's war on Gaza.
Completely. And it's happening right now. It's happening right now. And yes, I am very pro-Israel, but I'll defend everybody here in America who is anti-Israel. It's happening right now. Donald Trump is using anti-Semitism as like a ruse to go after universities, to go after media companies, and to go after students in this country. But again, we have due process, they have due process. Most of these cases have been taken to court, and I am hopeful that the court will uphold the constitutional principle of free speech and free expression in America.
But you heard Marco Rubio say that he, as Secretary of State, has the right to determine who is in violation of US laws, basing himself on a 1952 law called the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Yes, the court in Louisiana a couple weeks ago ruled that Rubio does have the authority to deport him, but now it's going to be based on the substance. Now Rubio and Trump have to make their case that this guy is a direct threat to American security. And simply holding anti-Israel, or by the way, anti-American views. Like, you should be able to be a student here on a student visa and hold anti-American views. You're free to do that. So that's what's going to be decided now. Simply holding anti-Israel views, is that a security threat to America? I don't think so.
What do you make of the administration's attempt to conflate between anti-Semitism and legitimate attacks and criticism of Israel? Because we just heard from a former high-ranking official within the Department of Homeland Security argue that freedom of speech in America does not apply on an equal basis to everyone.
Look, Ken Cuccinelli, good guy, I know him. He's utterly wrong, and he knows he's wrong. Free speech applies to everyone in this country, just like due process applies to everyone in this country. Make no mistake, what Trump and his team are trying to do is silence speech, period. And by the way, this is more sinister. They're trying to scare people into not wanting to come here.
Are you concerned that US citizens from certain backgrounds could be next? Because we heard the White House spokeswoman recently say that Trump has floated the idea of deporting American citizens. She said they were looking into the legality of doing so.
It's already happening. We had a lawyer 2 weeks ago flying back into this country. He's an American citizen, and our authorities detained him for 5 hours. Why? Because he defended some of the pro-Palestinian protesters on the University of Michigan campus. So it's already happening.
Is there any question that this would be completely illegal, the idea of deporting your own citizens?
It's completely illegal, and it's utterly un-American. Look, it's illegal and it's unconstitutional. But what's the message it sends? Like, I want everybody, white, black, brown, Christian, Muslim, Jew, non-believer, I want everybody to want to come to America, because I want everybody to think in America, you are free to say whatever you want and write whatever you want and think whatever you want, even if you are just here on a student visa. Donald Trump is sending a message to the world. If you don't think like me, if you don't love Israel, if you don't love America, we don't want you here. If you're Muslim, we don't want you here. If you're pro-Palestinian, we don't want you here. If you're brown or black, we don't want you here. That's the America that Trump is selling right now. That is just an ugly, ugly America that all of us Americans need to stand up against.
Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman and former presidential candidate, thanks so much.
Great to be with you.
While the US likes to portray itself as a beacon of freedom and democracy, there is little doubt that it is now dangerously sliding into authoritarianism. To many, the ongoing crackdown on freedom of speech in America isn't about immigration enforcement, and it's not about security. It's about silencing voices that are critical of Washington's key ally, Israel. Mahmoud Khalil's case has become a litmus test, not just for civil liberties in the US, but for how far the Trump administration is willing to go to crush voices of solidarity with Palestine. Protesting genocide is not terrorism. Holding a sign, leading a chant, calling for a ceasefire, these are not crimes. But under the Trump administration, they're being treated as such. As the US now threatens to deport peaceful activists, we're entering dangerous territory where the US government can take away someone's constitutional right to free speech, depending on their political beliefs. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team. Thanks for watching.